And we're now live streaming this.
Okay, good evening and welcome everyone. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so you're welcome to everyone viewing on YouTube. Elected members unable to join the meeting in person are able to join remotely. However, they will not be able to vote and their attendance will not be officially recorded, although their virtual attendance will be noted in the minutes. Non-voting independent members unable to join the meeting in person are able to join remotely. They retain speaking rights and are encouraged to turn on their camera when asking questions. With regards to the meeting etiquette, please may I ask you indicate you wish to speak by raising your physical hand. Please note that the chat function on Zoom will not be used in this meeting, and questions or comment on the agenda pack should be raised via the chair. Item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. Are there any apologies for absence or lateness?
Yes, Chair, we've had apology from independent member Jazz Sansoy and also from independent member Colson Stead, who has a family emergency and doesn't think she'll be able to join the meeting.
Okay. Stephen Reid?
I've not received any other apologies.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, and yes, Stephen Reid, our auditor, is unable to attend this evening.
Thank you, Pauline. Councillors, any apologies of absence? Okay, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. To those members who are physically present, are there any declarations of interest? Okay. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. Members are requested to consider and agree the accuracy of the minutes of the last meeting of the Audit Committee held on the 12th of October 2022. To the members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, are the minutes agreed?
Check if I have one amendment.
Okay.
Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Motions. Council tax that should have requested council tax the forward plan. I think it's certainly right. It was council tax report we received that evening wasn't satisfactory.
Okay.
Right, okay.
Any other amendments? Okay. So to members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands are the minutes agreed? Thank you. Okay. Item 4, action logs. So the committee is asked to note the contents of the action logs and the actions to be closed at this meeting. Are there any questions on this report? No, we'll move on. The report is noted. Item 5, REBA policy and procedure document annual review. I invite Officer Jamie Cook, who I believe is online, to give a brief introduction to the report, and I will open the floor to the following. Jamie.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, committee. So this report explains the Audit Committee's oversight role in respect of the regulation of Investigatory Powers Act regulations which regulate the use of covert surveillance. So the legal framework permits specified public authorities, which include local authorities, to use covert surveillance when investigating serious criminal offences. It's actually quite rare for these powers to be used. And actually, in the case of Newham, for the years 2020, 2021 and 2022, there have been no applications to use these powers. Nevertheless, we present an annual report and we also review our policy to make sure it is aligned to the legislation. So that's just a very brief introduction from me. Myself and my colleague Gary Connors, who is the author of this report, will be very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions? Councillor Paul, please.
Clarification, Chair. On section 3, background discussion, subheading the role of members. Because these are regulatory powers, would it be more accurate to say the role of the audit board rather than the role of members? Because you could read it. And my question was, you wouldn't want a member to influence the discharge of the RIPA powers.
No.
So therefore, there's no role for members, but there's a role of oversight for audit. I know it's a semantic change, but I think it's quite an important one when we're talking about RIPA powers.
Amy? Any comment follow through on that, please? Or Gary?
Thank you. I mean, I note that comment, and that, you know, that seems like a good comment. Obviously, Gary, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, Councillor, absolutely agree. I take that and will amend going forward. I completely agree.
Thank you.
And I've got one other on the, it's just a small thing. It says the RIPA, the Corporate Director for Environment and Sustainable Transport, is the FRO.
Sorry, could you just say the points? It just helps people.
Sorry, it's at the very back. It's the reference.
Section 5 on page 7.
Yeah. It says the SRO is the Corporate Director for Environment and Sustainable Transport, but we have an interim at the moment, not a permanent. I know this is a legal thing, and in law, words matter. It might be just an amendment needs to clarify, but we wouldn't want our action to fall down because we haven't put in interim versus.
Conrad had a comment.
So just to clarify on the legal basis, 1.4 in the report, I mean, I entirely understand the point that is being made. However, the kind of convention is that when a post is referred to, it therefore covers whoever is acting at the relevant point in time. If one were to change the wording to say the current interim, then 3 months down the line, although on the current one, will then come out of date. So that's why the convention has to be that way.
Yeah,
That's not in some
yeah, three, because it's a legal thing, wouldn't want technicalities about discharging their duty.
No, once whoever's in the post, whether they're permanent or temporary, will acquire the legal duties and responsibilities. Any further comment, Gary, Jamie, please, on the report?
None from me, Chair. Gary, anything from you?
None from me, Chair. Jamie, thank you.
Councillor Cadder, please.
Just one quick question. And I appreciate that actually over the last 3 years we've had no need to use the powers. But normally, would you also record equalities data about subjects under investigation?
We certainly would record, because we'd have all the information if we had applications. I mean, the thing I would say is certainly if you were looking at individuals, I guess, and we haven't had those come through in the past 3 years. So yes, we would record information. The other thing I would just say, for the audit committee, is we do run, whilst we might not have investigations that have met RIPA criteria, we also, which is good practice amongst most authorities now, we do run a process where we run a non-RIPA policy. So we look at things when we move around our flight tips, CCTV cameras, etc., and we will look at risk assessments and equalities assessments around those. They are looking at the public spaces as opposed to undertaking any covert surveillance of individuals. That's just moving our own public cameras, but we do take that. But yes, Councillor, we would pick up obviously the equalities data when we do that.
Okay, if there's no further questions or comments, the audit committee is recommended to note the contents of this report. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the recommendation agreed? Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to item 6, Treasury Management Strategy Statement 2023-24 and Annual Investment Strategy 2023-24. Just yourself?
Yes.
Okay, I'll invite Officer Stephen Wild to give a brief introduction to the report, and then I will open the floor to questions. Stephen?
Good evening, everyone. The Treasury Management Strategy Report is a part of a statutory suite of Treasury reports we bring to Cabinet and full Council for approval, but we've chosen this committee to scrutinise it or review the report before it actually goes up to Cabinet. It's due to go up to Cabinet on the 16th of February. This is an annual report that we present to this for full council approval. It's in compliance with the CIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management and the Prudential Code. The code has been revised in December 2021. and there are new reporting requirements included in this report to ensure compliance with that code of practice. The recommendations being put before Cabinet is one for the this document and the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and Annual Investment Strategy, which form part of the budget report to be approved by Cabinet and full Council. The revised Treasury and Prudential indicators, which are set out in Annex 1 of this report. And there is also, in compliance with Financial Regulation C15, a requirement that Cabinet approve any long-term requirement for long-term borrowing. There is a requirement set out in this for £447 million. I think Conrad would want to say a few words on that after I've finished. I'd just like to say that the key changes in this document from the previous year in terms of the prudential indicators reflects the capital programme that is being put before a Cabinet next week. It represents what's already in the capital programme and what is pending to go through in February. So that may well change. I should also point out there is quite a large borrowing requirement set out in this report, but that borrowing requirement will change. It reflects what the net financing position of our capital programme. Once you take off capital grants, capital receipts, and revenue contributions that are made, and other things, including the MRP provision, which is offset. So the borrowing represents the balance, if you like, of that net financing requirement of the capital programme. Capital grants, by their very nature, will change from year to year. The spending or the capital spend will although it's set out in the plan, may well slip and change during the course of the 3 years. So this is a big number, but a new requirement of the code of practice is that the prudential indicators have to be integrated within the quarterly budget monitoring process. So I would say that a lot of that requirement is back-ended into 25-26, and we would keep a close eye on the affordability and sustainability of that capital programme, and that will give us time to make any corrective action to ensure that the capital programme was still in line with those requirements. As a result, the other feature of main requirements changes in the code of practice on prudential code and treasury practice was that we include liability benchmark. The benchmark requires us, or doesn't require, but it suggests that we net off our investment cash balances after we've set a liquidity allowance. We've suggested a liquidity allowance of £50 million, and that figure has been set to reflect the variability in our cash flow. So should we need the cash to fund our daily cash requirements, then we've got a sum of money that is liquid or easily liquid. That's in the event that capital markets tighten up and we can't do any borrowing. So I think we're protected on that score, but any excess investment cash over and above the 50 million has to be channeled into the capital programme. This is what we're seeking to do. So that's brought our cash balances down from where they were at the beginning of the year, £229 million. We expect that we'll hit the liquidity allowance figure of £50 million by the end of this financial year. So that's using our internal resources to fund as much as we can, use the internal resource capacity, the capital programme, before we go out and do any external. So the other feature is that we set out a prudential indicator on the amount of income that is coming through from non-treasury loans. Essentially, that's coming through from Populo, to check and ensure that it's proportionate to the council's net revenue stream. And that's set out in the prudential indicators. Also, one of the big changes I've made in this year is on the investment limits, as we've got a smaller cash balance, and by definition it has to be liquid and in near liquid terms. I've reduced the actual in this report the actual credit limits to institutions and government bodies to reflect that lower cash balance as we go forward, which will be reviewed on a periodic basis. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Stephen. Conrad, please.
Thank you for that, Stephen, and thank you, Chair. Just three very quick points from me, if I may. The two first are about sort of process and role and remit, and then the third, just sort of more substantive comment, I suppose. So the first point, just be clear in terms of the audit committee. I mean, the borrowing requirement set out here flows from decisions that are proposed to be taken by Cabinet and in due course Council. With respect to, I don't think it's the role of this committee to be questioning in terms of this document those policy choices, so much as whether the Treasury strategy then provides that borrowing to be undertaken in a sensible and safe and prudent way, and so on. There are, of course, plenty of other fora where the actual capital programme can be debated and elsewhere. Second point, just on that process point. So the papers for the Cabinet on the 16th of February are being published this week. Short it is the case, and therefore include this report, which will the council meeting of February. Clearly, it is not to include back to the papers for Cabinet. Therefore, any comments this committee may have, but in the event that our comments the committee would like to make, then they can either be represented orally at that meeting, or if you prefer, a sort of written addendum be added to that paper, depending on the nature of any comments the audit committee emphasise the importance of the role of the audit committee in providing that sort of scrutiny of the proposals in advance of those meetings. And then the third point, we're moving away from the process a bit. Clearly, one needs delegated authority in order to be able to exercise loan transactions, which sometimes don't sort of neatly fit the Cabinet decision-making process because of the nature of the way they undertake them. So although the report properly proposes delegations to enable that to be done within the framework, my expectation is that I would take separate reports to Cabinet for individual tranches of loan funding, given the scale of the potential transactions, which I think is an important assurance to give. And there are plenty of points in the year at which finance is reported over to Cabinet. We would incorporate that into those reports, just to give the committee that assurance in case the nature of the delegation proposed is of any concern. Other than that, unless Andrew has anything to add, very happy that myself and colleagues will take questions on the report.
Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. Thank you, Chair. My question is, when we had the auditor here last year, there was a debate about how loans to the local authority trading companies and alike are accounted for. I know they're part of the group account, I think the vision. So my point is about governance. I will be referring, Chair, later on in the meeting to the corporate risk register, where Popular is mentioned there. That's one half. If you look at 3.9 and 3.10, let's put three on revised business plan of the travelling company could not be funded. Couldn't. Then if you look at 3.10, Service impediment, i.e. loans to council like Popular, are subject to separate governance processes, and the loans are made by a full. In terms of this concern with the assurance and governance, where would we see this separate governance process, and where is the full business plan so this committee can have full assurance but the processes are fully followed?
Okay, let me give a sort of overarching summary of that. Again, Stephen or others may wish to come in on the detail. I'll only talk about Popular. I mean, there are some smaller loans to the other council companies, but they are frankly of much smaller scale. So I imagine that is where the most significant concern may lie. So Popular has a working capital loan facility agreed with the council, although it is of course our subsidiary. We respect the fact that they are separate entities, and therefore there are proper loan agreements between those, and that provides for, where necessary, a drawdown on funds through that working capital loan agreement in order to fund development work. You know, the nature of housing development and building and so on is of course that one spends money at the start of the so that agreement provides the governance basis for that, and of course it opens to be look into the detail of how transactions against that have been managed and so on. Ultimately, of course, in order to lend money to Popular, indeed anywhere else for that matter, the council will have access to the funds. So the sort of the overall, should we borrow from a bank in order to fund an activity, is picked up through this report, and then that separate working capital loan provides detail of the transaction. I hope that helps. So I don't know, Stephen, if you feel that there's any more detail I should add to the way that works, and then we'll take a lot of questions.
No, other than to say that we did have indicative on the business plan from Popular. They're still subject to due diligence, but we wouldn't. We would seek to limit lending to that organisation until there was a full business plan in place.
Yeah, just to clarify, obviously, the total envelope is £447 million borrowing requirement. A substantial sum of that is going to be Popular. But again, the report says we haven't seen the business plan, right? But you're telling us you're going to get authorization to be lending money on an organisation, correct me if I'm wrong, what says here, you haven't had the business plan, there's a separate governance process. So again, you're asking, the committee's here, and Con is absolutely right. We're not here to manage the company. We're here to look at the oversight. At the moment, I haven't, that's my personal view, other members can speak for themselves, but I haven't got that assurance that we are lending money to an entity with a business plan, that the governance is there for me to review.
So perhaps I can pick that one up, Chair. And
Okay.
Stephen may want to add to it. So individual transactions to the company are supported by, let's call them development proposals. I mean, the exact terminology doesn't matter. So, for example, there would be a scheme which is proposed that the company would undertake development work, on conclusion of which it would recover the working capital loan. Those are subject to scrutiny and indeed will tend to go through the cabinet decision-making process to confirm this is the scheme of the investments and so on. That governance is provided there. You're right, and it is a source of a little frustration that the overall business plan for the company has not yet been finalised. I think the assurance you can take is that although that has not yet been finalised in the sense of being signed off by Cabinet, it's nonetheless been through substantive scrutiny at the Council's board and indeed by council officers of that. So although it has not yet been finalised, and I agree it would be better have it been, it's not that it is sort of lacking any business plan altogether. An important step of the governance has not been concluded, but there is that assurance.
Okay, and Chair, if I can, and I will make the point later in the meeting. When I look at the corporate risk register, which we're about to discuss, there was a concern raised about the, let's call them the organisation processes of Popular. And as I'm paraphrasing here, there was a report done, significant, let's say, development areas were found, and that report had to go to CMT for residual assurance. Now, if you put those two together, we have an entity where its internal processes were sufficiently not correct. A report had to be put through to CMT, but then tonight we are supposed to provide assurance on a significant part of borrowing, but the business plan is not there, the governance plan is not there, and when you look at the corporate risk register, it's on the corporate risk register. So I'm just saying, Chair, by you, there must be a way of providing assurance that loans to Populo are being made with sufficient governance and assurance. Because at the moment, and I'm just reading from 3.10 to 3.9 and stitching together the comments in the corporate risk register, let's say perhaps it's not quite there. I'm supportive of us building homes in Newham as a person, great. As a councillor, great. But the role of me as a member of this audit board is to say, is there sufficient governance processes in place to provide assurance for any future loans? At the moment, not quite there. But I know the intention is for it to be there and clients gave some assurances. But you can see from my perspective, you put the elements together, the assurance is not quite there around loans to Populo.
Okay. Conrad, could you explain the governance process in terms of how loans are agreed and approved for Populo so that we get some clarity on that, please?
Okay, so there is an overall loan facility called the Working Capital Loan Facility. I'm ashamed to admit I can't remember now if the limit on that is 40 or 45 million pounds, but someone can correct that for me. And in place
33 million at the moment.
Of the company. So the association, the agreements between the council and the company and so on provide for it to be able to borrow up to that limit from the council. When a site is identified for development, so let's take, because it's just outside the Didsbury site, when that site was first identified, Populo would have undertaken development work, architectural fees and all the associated matters in terms of getting towards construction in order to progress the scheme to a defined point using that working capital loan facility. And then on the sort of point defined with the council, not necessarily satisfactory completion of the whole scheme, but relevant milestones within the development programme, fees would therefore have been properly payable to respect to that, which in turn were then used to repay that loan. Which is therefore how the company kind of continues to operate without that loan going up and up and up, which is the details will vary, but that's a reasonably standard way of financing housing development through a subsidiary company. So the assurance you would have is each of those schemes, certainly now, and I don't know, I use the example of the Didsbury and actually don't know what the governments would have been in place at the time in 2017, 18 or whenever that scheme started, but what on the equivalent scheme now is that the proposal to develop XYZ site would have been approved by Cabinet and therefore, implicit various loan financing may be associated with that, which would therefore provide assurance that activity was not undertaken unless an approval had been sought. The major developments and the expectation and intention of the company was always that it would use some of that, smaller sums of that working capital loan facility to undertake retail work, for example, on maybe suitable development. within defined delegated levels. The actual loan transaction would then be reviewed in my department and signed off under appropriate delegated authority, for example, to ensure that the scheme was viable, milestones had been met, and so on. So, on an individual transaction basis, I think there's a good and relatively standard governance process in place to regulate individual transactions. I agree with you. It is not ideal that the overall business plan for the company has not yet been finalised, and we are working to conclude that as quickly as possible so that can be brought to Cabinet in order to close the loop, if you like, at the point you've identified. Is that it? Yeah.
I'm going to have to move on to Councillor Booker, please, and then quickly Councillor Chowdhury, then we have to close this off. Sorry.
To be honest, I wonder whether my question is too close anyway to what Councillor Paul has said. I think that and forgive me if I've misunderstood how the different reports work, but if the Treasury report is sort of part of the reassurance that those that are making decisions use in order to say that these are okay places for us to put money, then are we happy that the risk register has the governance of popular as amber when our appetite for it is green? So I suppose that my concern was that if we use one in order to justify doing them, then is the risk with the governance of popular factored into the formation of the Treasury report?
Stephen?
This report is essentially around the Treasury side. There's, as I said, a separate governance on capital schemes. On the Treasury side, what I was saying earlier about the prudential indicators, aim to give some form of reassurance on connection between the capital strategy report and the budget report, that what we do is affordable and sustainable, and the fact that we do this on a quarterly basis. The budget monitoring process hopefully will give some reassurance. And we also, as part of the reporting procedures, we have to provide, this is a forward-looking report, but then there will be a backward-looking report that comes in June 24 on this, but there's also a mid-year report which will come up in November, and I think by that time then we'll have, I would have thought we'd have finalised the business plan with Populo, and I would expect that we'd have more accurate forecasts of borrowing going forward.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Booker. Councillor Chowdhury, please. And then final question.
I've got a general point and then a question. So the general point is this is a lot of information to digest, and reflecting on a lot of the audit committees, I think there's not enough time to scrutinise a lot of these documents. So for example, we're spending 10 minutes scrutinising the Treasury management policy, which doesn't seem effective, and it's too much information that's not put into a digestible form. That's an observation. So the question is, mentioned £50 million liquidity allowance, and that we're using our internal reserves to fund capital expenditure. What's the level of reserves that's remaining, and what's that liquidity allowance supposed to be used for? Is that like a legal requirement that we have to have £50 million liquidity? Why don't we borrow for capital expenditure in the first place rather than using our own cash reserves?
Let me deal with both of those. So, I mean, in terms of timing, the report is unavoidably technical in nature. Always have to take comments on how we can present some of those technical issues in a way, but it's impossible to avoid there being technical content to it. The purpose, and I think the strength of taking it in the route that we do, so through the audit committee en route to Cabinet and Council, is precisely because it is harder still for Cabinet, and I think extremely difficult for Council to conduct a meaningful scrutiny in those meetings of the entire report. Hence, they rely on the audit committee for that. Now, we have provided training for audit committee members on that. I am entirely open to suggestions about how agendas can be structured to allow more time for this, or some form of working group, or whatever might be appropriate, in order to enable the time to be spent on it. We will support that in whatever way members want. But, the idea of bringing it here is precisely because it is make that time effective at cabinet, or indeed with respect to all councillors of the council, even more difficult to expect them to conduct detailed scrutiny of it in the council meeting itself. So that's why it comes here, but we're very happy to look at how to create more time for them. In terms of the liquidity allowance, so we need to draw a distinction between the actual amount of reserves available to council and the way to which they are, not to avoid being a little bit technical here, represented by cash flow. So the general fund reserve currently stands at £7 million, and that is the accounting value of it, and it is absolutely available there to provide assurance against sort of unexpected events or whatever. One doesn't actually need to hold the cash for that, and indeed it may be sensible, I'm talking directly now, to use that money to fund planned expenditure rather than incur the borrowing and hold the £7 million, in cash. So when we talk about sort of use of reserves in that sense, it's a technical accounting point rather than actually expending the reserves. On the liquidity allowance, in total, the council spends somewhere of the order of £1.5 billion a year. Much of that is in and out transactions, so housing benefit would be a very good example of that, where we pay an average year something like £250 million or more out in housing benefit payments, and very shortly afterwards receive a government grant that covers us the cost of that. But inevitably, as you can imagine, with cash flows of that size, there can be fluctuations in sort of balance in the bank at the end of the day, if one likes to put it that way. £50 million, we think, is an appropriate allowance to say we would always want to hold at least that much cash, just because the scale of the activity, just ordinary day-to-day activity, could mean that you started to run physically short of cash if you didn't have that buffer. And what you don't want to do is to go into a short-term overdraft in order to pay suppliers the next day because of the interest costs involved. So that you think of that as the sort of buffer to avoid going overdrawn, I suppose might be the best way to put that. Is that?
Can I ask a very quick follow-up?
Once 10 seconds, because we have to move on now, please.
And any reevaluation of our reserves need following the pandemic? So if I've asked a similar question before, but if another emergency happens, has that been any reevaluation since the pandemic, any learnings that's been applied to that?
Well, it is indeed, of course, a concern, which is why the budget, which is about to be published, updates and strengthens the strategy on building up those reserves.
Okay, thank you. We need to move on. So the audit committee is recommended to note the contents of this report. Do members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. Okay, item 7, handling of any reports from local government ombudsman annual report. I invite the officer James Partis to give a brief introduction to the report, and I will open the floor for questions. Okay, thank you, James.
I've seen on YouTube.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, I'll give a quick introduction to this paper, which hopefully, helpfully, despite the vast number of appendices that are attached to it, gives the Audit Committee an update on the latest sort of annual review of our complaints for the period 2021 and 2022. It also includes a bit more of a deep dive in one of the appendices into the trends around our repairs complaints, which is obviously one of our sort of high volume, or it is the highest volume area of complaints in the council. So this is a sort of recasting of the report that went to, I believe, November Cabinet in 2022. And it does draw out some pretty significant trends and changes in trends around complaints, which drew significant interest in conversation at Cabinet. And for obvious reasons, I think, you know, should draw significant interest and attention from the Audit Committee and other forums. The report hopefully sets out in section 4 to the actual kind of core report, which is in Appendix C, I believe, the major trends, particularly noting the near 50% increase in complaints in that yearly period. Just by way of commentary, there's you know, substantial sort of analysis in the more detailed annual complaints report into sort of root causes for those complaints, but there's a combination of factors driving that, ranging from you know, a perceived sort of build up of demand in the general council business and amount of resident need for service support built up over the COVID period, particularly when services were not operating fully. And you know, when we actually shut down a significant range of council services for resident related period, it's not unexpected to have that demand sort of feature quite significantly in the year that follows. That itself, you know, brings a significant amount of pressure into core services and their ability to deliver. However, you know, the trend also, you know, points to some significant improvement priorities for the council, particularly around the quality of service delivery in key areas like repairs and environmental services, which is sort of noted and broken down in more detail in the report. You know, the report then goes into talking about our sort of planned next steps for responding to these challenges, which I'll quickly close with before sort of ceasing the presentation. The increase in demand has therefore had an impact on our timeliness of responses, and that's sort of summarised on paragraph 4.2. So there's been an 80% reduction in our performance in responding to complaints on time, which is obviously a challenge in and of itself and not something we should be overlooking at all. And I think it's something to kind of be seen in the context of that significant increase of demand. You know, as you see a 50% increase in numbers of complaints coming in, you know, core functions like the corporate complaints team and services that are responsible for providing detailed responses to complaints, they're all significantly stretched to respond to that. The report also summarises the position around the latest local government ombudsman letter to Newham, which is an annual letter which all local authorities receive. And, you know, the letter itself is appended to the report for information, but it highlights one particular case where we did not act in a sufficiently timely way to take the actions required of us by the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman has passed a view about what that means. In other areas, the timeliness of responding to other actions from the Ombudsman has also been offered up as an area of improvement. But there is also, you know, positive feedback from the Ombudsman in relation to a general number of Ombudsman cases that have been submitted and the trend around that. So that's there for information. On repairs, and the report itself does break down what our top 5 sort of complaints areas are, and they are repairs, parking and enforcement, and housing and highways. And the sort of beyond the general observations about increased demand and increased pressures on services as COVID, there are some common themes which I do think are worth drawing out. The most common reasons for people feeling the need to complain, or residents to complain, is generally you know, issues relating to a delay in delivering something or a delay in responding to a resident inquiry. And those are things that, you know, we should be quite concerned about, and we should take you know, action to improve. Because we know that when we don't respond to a resident's inquiry quickly, we don't respond to a particular demand, not only does it not meet the resident's expectations, but it builds up significant inefficiency in the council's processes, because that inevitably results in additional phone calls, additional letters, additional follow-ups from within the organisation to respond to that. So there's, there are really good reasons to want to take this seriously and to put in place significant improvement plans around that. And then second most common reason for complaints for those top 5 areas and generally is related to the quality of work provided or quality of service provision delivered to residents. And that in and of itself also is a significant reason for us to need to take significant action in response to that. The repairs trend is attached. I believe it's appendix, so I have to jump out of the main report. Appendix F, and it's just a 1-page visual graph, which hopefully, the trend over the last over a 1-year period. Actually, it's sort of something in the range of 18 months. And what we can draw out quite clearly from the data is that there has been a significant uptick in complaints that has had a knock-on impact on our ability to respond to those complaints, and is also fed through into quite a jagged trend around the number of stage 2 complaints that the service has been responsible for answering over that period. The stage 2 complaints are those sorts of complaints. The initial resolution offered or delivered by the council has not been satisfactory, and the resident has felt the need to access that part of the policy. But those trends are there for information, and for the repair service particularly, the delay in timeliness of delivering services is obviously a kind of key driver of those complaints, with 478 out of the 600 700 odd complaints that have come through to that service area being specifically related to being delivered or responded to. That's a very sort of helicopter view and overview of the report, and I imagine I have glossed over some quite important bits of detail, which I'm sure you're going to want to go into. In aid of giving the committee as much time as possible for questions, I'll stop there and obviously take questions.
Councillor Chowdhury, please.
Very excited to see some text under the qualities implications. My question is, do we collect demographic data on people who complain? And if so, is there any differences on ethnicity, gender, or anything else in terms of quality of response and response types?
That information, I do believe, is recorded. And I'm just going to quickly look at the detailed annual complaints report itself, which is Appendix 1, to see if that's broken down anywhere. Sorry, you caught me on the hoof, so I'll just quickly check that. Because if I can refer you to the report and give you the data now, I'd love to do that. If not, I might have to take that away to recommend that is detail that we should include in reports. Yeah, it's an excellent question. I believe that information is captured by the service. I don't believe we've broken it down in the annual complaints report, and it's something we absolutely should do.
Can we see it at the next?
Yeah, of course, happy to do that.
Councillor Beckles.
Chair, the cabinet member consulted on it, because I'll just look at at least the top part of the report. Don't see a date next to Councillor Charlene McLean's consultation section. It might have just been an omission in terms of whether they were consulted.
The report today is the reproduction packaging of the November annual complaints report that went to Cabinet. So I believe the clearance with the Cabinet member was secured as part of that, and this is just bringing that same report to this committee with any meaningful amendment or change. So I believe that might be why there's no specific date for this version of the report coming to this committee, but it is the same report that went to Cabinet, if that makes sense, and was in the sort of public domain.
Okay, my second part of my question, Chair, reminds me, is about the escalation to the Ombudsman. And when that happens, there's particularly a service breakdown or somewhat service failure, which has been highlighted in the report. You touched the point on COVID, and I think COVID has affected us in various different ways, affected the service. However, I think we can't keep using COVID as an excuse why the failures in our services, whether it's RMS, whether it's highways. So I think it just partially, in terms of that learning process, it clarifies, says there's an apology, but an apology is only as good as resolution. What sort of resolutions are going to come out from, or improvements in resolution and improvements in how we deal with actual first-time right cases is going to come out from this report? Because it's all well and good to be looking at it. It's graphically, it's quite splendid, But the learning should be, how do we improve our services? So one, residents aren't complaining. Two, when they call anyone at a particular point, whether it's housing repairs, whether it's highways, they're actually getting that resolution and it doesn't get escalated. There's a 72% upheld marker from an ombudsman. It's not great for us. It might be down, 5% from the previous year at 77, but 72% is well over 50%. And that's a marker that, we shouldn't be saying, oh, that's a bar and it's equivalent to other local authorities. We should be, 50% below. It shouldn't go to what sort of learning, tangible learnings. If we see this report again, it's going to come out from this report.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'll just give a quick summary of the sort of actions which have been taken already since the first draft of first seeing of the annual complaints reports come through. And then I'll quickly give an overview of the sorts of things which I think will be a feature of the work for the coming year on the back of this report. And without wanting to re-emphasise the point, the reception of this report at Cabinet was a sobering one, and the sort of messages it gave to Cabinet and CMT were quite stark. The kind of conversations that have followed immediately after the report sort of aired have focused directly on the specific requirements of policy resident experience and outcomes within key service areas like repairs and environmental services primarily. There are quite substantial improvement plans for those targeted areas developed, and I'll give a flavour on the housing side and the repair side without suggesting that we're anywhere near fully resolving those things. I just want to give you a sense of the sort of scale of action. So, for example, on housing repairs, some of the things that have been immediately actioned have been pretty substantial structural and operating model review of how for example, the repairs call centre and the second line and third line repairs teams work together. They have historically sat in completely different departments and parts of the organisation. And there's always been a sort of, I wouldn't say competitive or non-collaborative relationship between those parts of the system, but they haven't worked in an integrated way and haven't had a single plan for improvement, if that makes sense. And one of the key things we've done is bring together the front line repairs call centre, the second line repairs chase up call centre, which has been a pilot that's been developed in the last 2 months and has actually resulted in quite a substantial improvement in the reduction number of callbacks that residents have to make, because there's some really technical challenges in repair service. One of them, which has driven a lot of the kind of key issues around poor quality first time repair work, I'm getting into a lot of detail here, has been the fact that the diagnostic aspect of an initial contact with a resident, when somebody raises an issue about repair, for example, they'll describe a leaky tap or a leak or an issue with a door. The frontline staff that have traditionally taken those calls haven't had the best technical expertise to diagnose exactly what sort of trade or specialism is required to send out to that job. And we also haven't been excellent in using data to understand if this is the fourth or fifth time that a resident has had to call up about that particular issue. And new software modules and an integrated approach to bringing those teams together so that expertise will be shared are just a feature of some of the things that the service is doing. In addition to that, an online repairs portal is about to go live, which actually give residents a 24/7 access to knowing where their repairs are. A whole range of things within the service around process management are kicking on. And similarly within environment, we know that there are substantial issues, for example, with the interaction between the Love Clean Streets app, for those of you who might have used it for reporting fly tips, and a back office system. So you get all sorts of odd responses and outcomes about jobs being closed, for example, when they actually haven't, in fact. And there's detailed implementation and improvement plans for those specific areas, which are cracking on at speed. And I think it'd be very good to bring those back to this committee if it would like to receive those for further discussion. More broadly, there's a broader resident experience programme, which is much more about cross-council improvement of our culture, the way we respond to residents, the way we speak to them, and a general council-wide endeavour around improving our performance generally for resident experience, which is something that will come back to Cabinet in the next month or two, which again would be a useful thing to talk about. I'm not suggesting that all of those together will fix the problem. This is a substantial challenge, which requires consistent investment and commitment across the organisation over a substantial period to achieve the change. The only thing I can say is I do think the gravity of this report and the importance of it has been received, if that makes sense. And I think the audit committee's interest in it is absolutely valid, and I think that interest probably should be continued over the coming period.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you. I'm just going to group my questions into 3 different areas. So firstly, just in practical terms, on 4.52, would it be possible for us to get a breakdown of the 100% of complaints, which you've listed for 60% there? Could we get the other 40%? Just for context.
Yeah, of course.
And the second point on that, slightly related to Councillor Becky's point about consultation with members. Was the Cabinet Member for Housing consulted in this, seen as it does form a significant part of the problem and the challenge?
Yeah, that was a key feature of the discussion in Cabinet. So the kind of key, and if you refer to the kind of formal Cabinet forward to the annual complaints report in November, explicit reference to the fact that this is an accountability that should be held by almost every holder in Cabinet. And there was substantial consultation prior to the publication of the report at internal Cabinet briefings, for example, and internal challenge sessions to talk about what's going on behind the data and the report results. So yeah, Councillor Mohammed, for example, was actively involved in that. Sorry, I won't go any further because I'm sure you've got a further question.
And the second point, and this may, forgive me, this may be me being a completely new councillor and not understanding it. It says in the report that stage 1 complaints include inquiries from members and MPs. Now, that's not necessarily always a complaint. We could be putting through as a member a simple inquiry. Are we sure we have the terminology in this right? Are we capturing the right types of systems?
Got John on the call, and John's the definite service lead expert to get the right response on categorisation. And John, would you like to come in on that point and just clarify what a definition of a stage 1 complaint in the terminology of this report means? And yeah, respond to Councillor Challer's question about definition in relation to members' inquiries and other inquiries more generally.
Yes, hello, councillors. Yes, I think, could you just repeat what section that's in? I might have to go away and look at it because... Sorry?
It's in the residents' charter, the internal document that appears at start to help. And it says, if you receive a stage 1 complaint from an MP or from a member, but my query is, it's not always a complaint. It's not escalated to that issue. People can come to us for a variety of reasons, including they don't know where to go. So it could be a simple signposting issue. So are we sure that number's accurate? Because otherwise we're counting members' inquiries, and on average you'll see most weeks you must have at least 100 inquiries coming through from members. That might be a slightly different picture.
Oh, okay. I think if we may, could we take that away? Because I think if you're referring to the residents' charter report rather than the complaints report, I'm not all over that particular paragraph. So I'll have to look at that. But certainly it sounds as if that does need some clarification in that particular report. But I'm not all over the detail on the residents' charter report myself, I'm afraid.
Yes, if you could forward information so that the councillors and the rest of the committee can get clarity on it, please. Quickly, please, Jamie.
John, can you confirm to the committee, however, for the data that's in the actual annual complaints report, that what is counted are complaints and not additional inquiries?
Oh, yes, indeed. So, yeah. So in the complaints report, when we refer to a formal complaint, it will be a formal complaint raised through the complaints policy. And members' inquiries are a very different thing. On occasion, on a rare occasion, there may be a complaint, a formal complaint that is being represented by a councillor through the complaints process. They're acting on behalf of a constituent, very specifically through a formal complaint process. And that will obviously be dealt with as a formal complaint, as you can be represented by many advocates. But certainly a formal complaint should not be confused with a member's inquiry. And if there's any aspect of that in some of the other documentation, we'll certainly have a look at that and clarify.
Okay. I'd encourage you to look at that. And just my final point, Chair. Would it be possible, because you've got some laudable ambitions, including culture change. Would it be possible for this committee to receive an action plan about how the changes can be happened? Because it feels as a new member that we've been talking about the complaints and resident experience for a very, very that we're not seeing any action. Would it be able to, could we get a slight action plan on it?
Yeah, of course. And perhaps if that was presented as part of the update on the resident experience programme, we can break down a bit of a deep dive into the culture change work stream of that programme and the proposed actions there.
That would be helpful. Thank you, Jamie. Councillor Chowdhury, please.
Quick question. So this is potentially very rich, a rich data set. So you've got information perhaps on damp concentrations across the area. Is that data being joined up with any other part of the council to do targeted health intervention, for example? Or is it simply just being used to tick off complaints?
So, again, it's a great suggestion and question. The current use of this data is not as embedded into the practice of the organisation more generally as I think it could be. Is a sort of general answer. For example, in an ideal world, it would be fantastic if all services were referring to their complaints data and using it to inform policy, practice, service improvement, transformation activity within their own service areas, and using it to tackle real problems that they're facing. Obviously, not all complaints don't always represent a real problem, but in many cases they do. And for example, there'll be a substantial proportion of those repairs complaints that will refer to wider issues like damp and mold. I do know that within service areas that at DMTs this will be a topic that's discussed, and there'll be a regular update on that. And it's certainly something that features very regularly at CMT as an update on the quality of and timeliness of our responses to complaints. But that intelligent use of the data within service areas to kind of guide policy and practice, that is something I wouldn't be able to say we do currently, and it's an excellent suggestion. To be honest, I think we should absolutely feature that in the resident experience programme.
Thank you, James. Councillor Paul, one final question, then we'll need to move on, please.
More of a comment, Chair, and perhaps the Director of Housing can come to the next meeting. 40% of the complaints are housing related. I am disappointed by section 4.5.4. It seems to have belittled the approximately 2,000 residents who have complained. And I find that disrespectful to the residents of Newark, who when they complain, the organisation says, don't worry, you're only a small amount. I find that deeply disturbing. I wanted to put that on record. And also in 4.56, you seem to blame the wet weather for your complaints, which I find really disturbing. And especially when we just paid out, I think it's £18,000 to a resident because of damp, where housing hasn't fixed the case in years. So again, if I refer to the risk, you've mentioned this online portfolio. I will read from page 242 of the risk register. I'll read it for those residents who are watching. Portfolio online is the solution, and it says the project is slightly behind schedule due to a lack of business analyst resource and delays in launching the repairs functionality for the new housing online portal. The portal went live in December without the repairs functionality, and configuration changes are now being made with a view to go live for repairs in January. The business analyst resource is now in place. The programme is subject to a growth bid to continue to resource the project. So the budget is currently at risk pending approval. What I would say, what we've heard tonight is not a very good endorsement of housing element of our repairs. And perhaps officers may like to, through the chair, go away and in April have the corporate director of housing sitting in front of us to justify to residents why we can't fix their repairs. A lot of us live in own private housing. We would not accept this level of service, and therefore we do not accept it on behalf of our residents. I find it very poor, and I say that to you, Jane, because you're handling the repairs element, the system. The stuff which going in is housing, and I think we should look at housing, Chair, because this is not acceptable. It is poor. We should call it out. And in the risk register itself says we launched the system, the Saviour system, but we launched it without the functionality. I'm not even going to ask how much that system cost us. All I would ask via the chair, that the next audit meeting, housing is sitting in front of us with the full plan, with the outcomes, and we're not going to be mystified by process.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Paul. If you could have a very quick, please.
Yeah, and can I credit you for the triangulation between reports there? Yeah, that housing repairs online portal has been a challenge project, and it's why it's presented on the risk register for a number of reasons, ranging from technical implementation challenges, but also consistent resourcing across departments. Yeah, that project itself, I think, would benefit from a kind of discussion as part of, the ongoing improvement plan for repairs. And, I accept the challenge to the report, particularly for the aspects of the report that while seeking to sort of contextualise the scale of complaint, we wouldn't want that impression to be left by any audience or reader of this report that this is something that's not being taken seriously, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Paul, we have to move on. Okay, I will now read the recommendation. For reasons set out in the report and its appendices, Audit Committee is asked to note the Cabinet report for an executive summary of the annual complaints report 21-22, Appendix E. Further details, and as referred to in the Cabinet report, the committee may note the annual complaints report 21-22, Appendix A, and the annual letter from the Local Government Ombudsman, Appendix B. Note Appendix F for the data on housing repairs complaints trends since the release of the annual complaints report 2021-22. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the recommendations agreed? Okay, one councillor. Are you abstaining? Councillor Chadders is abstaining.
On the basis that I'm not confident.
Okay, could we have the housing director?
We will try and see what's on the agenda for April, whether it's possible to move the agenda around. Okay, thank you, James. Item 8. Quarterly internal audit update. I invite Officer Nicole Metivier to give a brief introduction to the report, and I will open the floor for questions. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out a summary of the work carried out in Q3 and a look forward to audits in Q4 and also into the next year. I'd like to take the report as read to allow time for questions, but there are 2 updates to make since this paper was published. We're going to be carrying out an audit of recruitment practices and a sample of directorates, as we haven't audited that area in some time. And as agreed with the chair in such, we're going to carry out a benchmarking exercise against a recent summary report from Grant Thornton, who looked at the lessons that they could gather from recent public interest reports. And so it will provide useful assurance regarding corporate counsel.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, any questions, please? Councillor Paul?
Let's go first.
Please,
Thank you. Can I just say on the good work of sections 1.4 to 1, sorry, I think so. On the additional payments.
Yes.
I note in here, I think in August or May, we will go under tighter recommendation. Can we not do that now? There seems to be a lot of money being paid to people who shouldn't have the money. So why can't we from now take the tough measures to get the money back? And also, I like to see them tighter controls now. And what are we doing to assess the managers who went round the system to pay the money? You give an example here of an email correspondence. So for me, Chair, I would like those tighter, would it be possible to have the tighter controls now rather than some point in the future due to the amount of money at risk? And what are we doing to deal via perhaps the disciplinary process with managers who are circumventing the process to pay money to people who shouldn't be getting the money?
Could I hand this over to Nicola, who was the person who led on this piece of work?
I'll put your question. back to the HR director on what are we doing about these individuals. She has a list of those individuals. The report that went to CMT had two different levels. The first was tackling the pay and grading policy that is woefully out of date and unable to comply with it. So it was updating that. We were going to go for a time against that, and then if tighter controls were needed to put those in, they would be very draconian type controls. So we were trying for the controls which would engage management to do what management should do. We have seen that management haven't been doing that, they've been circumventing it to an extent already, but we're going to give them the opportunity and a policy for them to comply with, because it's difficult to comply with. It was impossible to comply with the policy. They shouldn't have circumvented all the controls that were there, but it was impossible to comply with the policy. So the reference to and implement tighter controls was after a period of time where they had a decent policy and a decent decent system of Fusion to use, because again, they couldn't use the forms in Fusion. It was impossible to comply with the policy or to use Fusion correctly. So we're going to correct that, then ascertain whether management were doing what they were supposed to do, and if not, then implement really draconian tick and bash type control.
Thank you. Conrad would like to come in, please.
To add to that, if I may, provide some reassurance. When I first saw this report, my reaction was much as Paul's was. I was persuaded, and I think this is absolutely right, given that the current policy and processes are not as they should be, sort of immediately move from that situation to a kind of much tighter and more direct approach would be problematic. The right approach is to sort out the policy and provide the clarity to it, sort out processes so that people can comply with it, allow a short space of time to then demonstrate that that is working, and if the outcome of that, very much hope the outcome of that is that does have the desired effect. If it does not, then we will impose those further controls. So I kind of entirely understand where you're coming from, and that was my first reaction. I do think the approach that's been set out those is the right one, just to allow that short space of time to allow the policies to be operational.
Councillor Booker, please.
To say I completely understand that, and I think it makes perfect sense. And I think it would be really good, because it's such a sort of a standout thing in this, if we could kind of hear back as soon as there is kind of data on how the implementation has changed, then that would be a really good thing for us to hear, I think.
Yes, thank you.
And we do follow up all of our audit reports. So because this is a no assurance, we will be following that up. So definitely.
Thank you, Nicola. Councillor Chowdhury, please.
So in my past life as auditor, I'm a tax auditor, the materiality was 2p. So often we focus on the big expenditure, but also I think a good sign of good internal controls to look at the small expenditure. So a suggestion for your forward plan, I brought a clock with me, which is excited.
Shake to the camera.
the new and May, so it's one from a few months ago. Very important document, tells people what the council's spending their money on. It's an important form of communication. However, also received this, which is a separate magazine about the Queen, which doesn't really seem to relate to what the council's up to. Could have very easily have been a pull-out page within the same magazine. And this isn't a comment on the Queen or anything like that. It's more about what the council's spending its money on. And as a normal resident, they're going to care about every single penny, especially if it's such visible to them that it's such a their letterbox. With that in mind, can you explain, if you know, what the spending controls are for the new magazine? Explain how something like this would occur, what the value consideration would be, and if not, could you consider that as a future area of focus for your forward plan?
Conrad, please.
So the ordinary expenditure control regime applies to the production of the new magazine. So budget, I don't know exactly what the annual budget is, but I can find out and advise if that is helpful. In order to cover the production and printing and so on of it on the I think it's produced quarterly, isn't it, or bi-monthly? And within that budget, the responsible managers are expected and required to comply with all the usual control rules about separation of duties and proper authorisation of expenditure and procurement and so on. Clearly, one can form a view, a personal view, a political view on how useful or otherwise the content is, or what a resident might make of the material that was produced on the death of the Queen. And you know, one can have one's own view on that, but the same kind of expenditure control regime applies to that. And so I don't know exactly what that budget was offhand or precisely how it's been spent, but the same rules apply as with much of the material that the council produces, or indeed many of the things that the council does. One can have a view on whether or not they should do.
Thank you, Conrad. Councillor Beckles, please. Just one quick question, please.
Yeah, just one question. It's on the care home residential placement and the overpayments that were made. Now, I've got care home in my own ward, and people who have loved ones have their family in their care homes. And the fact is that 2 residents died. The care home didn't inform the council up until there was a review point. So it brings to mind a bit of a question about, 1, contract management, and 2, about how proactive we are in terms of, 1, finding out if that person is alive and dead. We've got mortuary service, we've got, regulatory services within the council that I'm sure there's some way to link all that up. But the fact is, these companies have done that shows that maybe, I guess, the penalty for breaching and claiming money for people who are no longer here, which must be quite upsetting to the families. And, as councillors, we have to look at for our residents, especially the most vulnerable. What penalties are in place for when people do that, or when organisations do that? And in terms of its care package at 24 months, need changes. We've talked about COVID, we've talked about debilitating and diseases. How can that be tightened up so that we know when people pass away, we know when overpayments are being made, and what punitive measures can be put in place to stop breaches of this kind of contract? But this, to me, is quite offensive. You speak about past lives. I used to be a care home inspector, CQC, did that for 2 years. And unfortunately, Newham was on my patch. Newham was probably the worst performing borough throughout London. And it seems as though little has changed if we're looking at it from a moderate assurance. So how do we get that to a green substantial assurance, improve the contract management, and ensure companies aren't facing dead relatives of their money?
Thank you, Councillor. Conrad, please.
So I think although I understand where the suggestion is coming from, I think it is likely to be quite difficult to sort of use, for instance, mortuary records as a means of catching that practice. You are required, as you referenced, to carry out annual reviews of cases, and that's the sort of backdrop control. I entirely agree with you that if a resident in the care home passed away and the company doesn't then inform the council promptly of that in order to enable the payments to be stopped, I entirely agree that is wrong and should not happen. I don't know the precise details of that contract there and precisely the remedy that can be provided. Maybe one of the team does, but if not, again, I can check on the particular case there and what remedies were available under the contract and the extent to which they were used.
Thank you, Conrad. Nicole, please.
As I noted in the report, the care homes are contacted prior to the payment run to ask for them to confirm that those payments should go through. However, at the beginning of COVID, the control for them to physically confirm that the residents were still there was lapsed because they didn't want the care homes to go under. So that control is being reintroduced. So care homes will have to physically confirm to us that those payments are correct. In terms of the recovery of the money, once it's identified, it will be netted off the next month's payment run, because generally local care homes will have local residents, so there'll be a population of people that the money can be recovered against.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. I'm afraid I need to bring this to a close. So the Audit Committee is recommended to note the contents of this report. Members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. Item 9, Quarterly Counter Fraud Progress Report. I invite Officer Nick Sharp to give a brief introduction to the report, and I will then open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Bringing the quarterly fraud report open to you all. Taking the report as read and to leave time for questions, the main thing I just wanted to point out was 1.2 in terms of I'm pleased to say that the fraud team's results have already surpassed that of the last 5 years. Worth noting that we don't have, we're using a 5-year model because we don't have the records prior to that time. But I'm pleased to say with 2 months left of financial year, we've kind of surpassed that and team doing well. So on that and taking it as read, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
I'll just start first. I think we should make focus again on section 1.2 that we have to congratulate Nick, who has been nominated for a national award at the Counter Fraud Awards later on this month. So just for the record, so that everybody knows that a member of staff at NUM has been publicly acknowledged by the industry. So well done, Nick.
Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions, please. Councillor Paul.
Yeah, like again, well done for the work. I just want to go back 1.9. Yeah, 1.9, 1.10, and 111. So on 1.9, I'll say because people are watching as we speak, there are 179 applications to the value except 4. Have we recovered any of that money?
I would invite colleagues that are still on the call if they are there to.
Okay, I asked them in. Okay.
Oh, this is sorry.
So 1.9, 179 applications, and we then will be, let's say, fleeced after just under £46,000. 1.10 had 10,000 single person discounts. I suspect the figure is not exactly 10,000 because it's rounded off. I want to know what we've done. Can you tell me what we can recover the money from those 10,000 people? And what's the action plan there? And the last one is 1.11. We've got 513 active. Now we're paying just under 4 million. Can you give an update on the recovery of funds, please?
I won't have the exact figures to hand, I'm afraid, but I'll definitely have to get them straight back to you.
1.9, yeah, 110 and 111.
And what I can offer assurance on is the current position around housing benefit overpayment, which is kind of the broad umbrella which this falls underneath, is something that's being incredibly actively worked on by the service, obviously working closely with Nick's team and colleagues. There are significant financial implications for not recovering because we lose subsidy from DWP for it, and as a result, there is substantial interest and attention to it. For all of these cases, there will, as a minimum standard, there will be the normal collections process applied, which is administered, I think, pretty rigorously in Newham. The additional action that's taken in cases of clear fraud and criminal proceedings or anything else that follows, I'll need to get a specific briefing on the recovery of that. But I'm very happy to bring that back very quickly.
Just on those 3 and the action plan, we're going to recover. Thank you.
Yeah, that's straightforward for us to bring back to you.
Any further questions, Councillor Chowdhury?
What is the overall cost of fraud recovery versus the amount recovered? What's the opportunity cost of focusing on this versus spending lots of money on something else?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to give you the exact sort of analysis of that. I think for the most part, the cost of collections processes is relatively minimal. If I'm being honest, it's automatically generated letters and emails that are sent out. There's additional initiatives we've trialled out around nudging people to get in contact with us at an earlier stage if it's, in the case of fraud, we're not nudging, we're instructing and we're criminally prosecuting. But in general terms for collection, we endeavour to try and use low cost methods to nudge people towards getting in touch and accessing support, early support and debt advice and that sort of stuff. There are following processes which I'm definitely not an expert on around bailiffs and collections and even selling off lots of debt to third parties to go collect it for us. That's usually done in a commercially advantageous way with an assessment of the sort of what the cost is. But I can include that as part of the return back to the committee on collections position, the cost of collection as a general point, if helpful.
Okay, any further questions? If not, we'll close this one off. Okay, thank you. The audit committee is recommended to note the contents of this report. The members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands if the recommendation is agreed? Thank you. We'll now move on to item 10, quarterly update on the risk management and risk register. By Officer Nicola, give a brief introduction to the report and then I will open the floor to questions. Nicola, thank you.
Thank you. So this risk update contains four main aspects. The first is an update to the corporate risk register, which the committee receives every quarter. And then we have a directorate risk register, environment, sustainable transport. We have officers on the Zoom to answer any questions. Community wealth building project. We have an officer ready to answer any questions, and transformation project. And we have an officer in the room to answer any questions. If I briefly go through the corporate risk register and then take any questions. Corporate risk register this time includes one new risk, which is stability of leadership, due to the large number of interims to our senior leadership team and various new members of the team as well. And also the update from our staff survey, whereas senior leadership scored quite lowly, and that's an area that we're working on. So with CMT's approval, that has gone in because it is a risk that they are aware of, and they have, as you can see, various projects and programmes in place to mitigate that. Are there any questions on the corporate risk register before we move on to the other ones? Councillor Booker, please.
Thank you. I don't know whether maybe it's more of a comment than a question, only because I don't know that you could answer it. So I don't know whether it's a fair thing to ask you. But around risk and people, it feels a little bit concerning that there doesn't seem to be any of the mitigations to be looking at policy changes around grievances and things like that, and instead introducing a resolution hub, which, although is a very good thing to have, and it's very good for resolutions to happen before things go to grievances and that sort of thing. But has there been any thought around looking at policy changes? I only ask because I know that there is currently some trade union requests for those policies to be looked at the moment. And there was a report in 2020 talking about the trust gap in organisations, which was to do with whether staff members felt that if they were to bring something up, that it would be resolved. And if there is this sort of trust gap in all organisations, then we assume that it would be here too, and whether having something that focuses on informal resolutions, actually, that if the trust isn't there, then it's a very difficult thing to do that and put the onus on staff members in order to do that.
Conrad, please.
So in terms of the policy framework, there's somewhere of the order of about 40 HR policies covering the range of things that you would expect them to cover. And there is a process underway to review those. One of the things I did at the start of that was to ensure that it was prioritised in the right way. That includes those policies around sort of grievance, resolution, and indeed the harder edge side of that around capability and disciplinary, with a view to ensuring that those policies and processes were more streamlined, precisely to go for the objective, which I think you're looking towards, of trying to ensure that where those matters do come up, they are dealt with as quickly as the subject matter reasonably allows them to be. So that is underway, and those are sort of first policies that I want to review as part of that. And again, you're right to highlight that the staff survey shows that there are some legitimate concerns there, and that's part of the response to.
Thanks, Conrad. Councillor Paul.
Yeah, you mentioned the high number of interims of the senior leadership team. What is that in terms of percentage? And how many are we talking about?
Do you want to take another question, and then I'll get you an answer to that while I just go through the list of names?
Because you can't, and just linked to that really, in terms of the corporate survey, can we have a copy of it, please? What are the staff saying? Because obviously we need to look at assurances. It's back to Councillor Booker's question about, the appropriateness of policies. We don't know whether people are not happy because the policies are not right, and that would be useful. And also, just to go down, I note that this senior management are having sort of leadership training, but it doesn't say what is being trained at, right? So there could be a thread there. There could be, we could have, a development area in our senior management team, which is impacting the staff, which is coming out in the staff survey, right? I don't know whether that's true or not, but just for assurance, and it's back to the question about policies, but the policies are appropriate. So in summary, can we see the staff evaluation? Is it like a 360 evaluation? What are the areas people are not happy about? And this senior management development program, what is being developed?
Conrad, please.
Okay, so on the senior management team then, and apologies if I miss anybody out, I think the answer to your question is that 7 out of 11 are on some form of interim or acting up basis. So the chief executive is a permanent member of staff with a permanent role as the corporate director of balance and health, who is acting into the role of chief executive. And there are 2 other members of the management team. So Darren Levy is the director of housing, and Jason Sherlock does the interim or acting director of balance and health, with the same position. They are permanent employees, but they are acting up into a role. There are also, there's a 4th person in that category who's on the call, Jamie Cook, who's Director of Environmental Sustainable Transport. You have then 3 people who are interims or agency in a conventional sense. So that's the Chief Marketing Officer, the Corporate Director of Inclusive Economy, and the Monitoring Officer. So that makes the 7 who are not permanently in their substantive role, you see what I mean? And then you have myself, Tim Aldridge, James Partis, and Amit Shankar as Chief Digital Officer, who are permanently occupying their permanent roles. That makes sense. 64%? It's 7 out of 11.
Yeah, I'm a percentage person. Yeah, it's about 64%, right?
63, but
63. Okay.
Well, this is the point about putting it on the corporate risk register. I mean, not to say that there is something that has gone wrong to lead to that situation. Organisations go through change. That is normal. But the fact is, therefore, that team, that corporate team, is relatively newly formed. There are some people in there who are have not been for very long in their current role, and it is therefore right. And that's the point of a risk register. Yes. So, well, inevitably, therefore, that team might not be performing quite so well as we hope it will do in 6 months' time. These are the actions in place, including that team building leadership development program, to ensure the performance does reach that level. So it's criticism of that team. Merely saying that there has been change, and as a consequence, we should put something in place to manage that.
On record, Chair, I think, and I concur with what you said there. It's about putting your hand up and saying, you know what, we should put ourselves in this, that's fine. And my last question, on question number 14, they link back to the popular point I made in the business plan section of the Treasury Management. If I read here, a review of the popular governance arrangements were presented CMT in August 22. The report contained recommendations relating to popular board, popular homes, the business plan approval, the commissioning process, financial governance, the effectiveness of governance, meetings. These recommendations will be turned into an action plan, which will be brought to CMT on a regular basis to ensure on track and delivery. Just to show that we remember our role is about assurance and governance, linking back to the point I made about the financial aspects of the project. Can we, the committee, be sent the copy of the report and copies of the update reports to go into CMT? Well, this is a significant financial risk to the organisation. And I didn't make the point in the first part of the meeting. There's a linkage here between we don't quite know what we're lending, and it looks like there are significant development areas related to how Popular is working.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Paul. Councillor Beckles, you had asked, did you put your hand up earlier?
Yeah.
Very quickly, because
Very quickly, looking at Appendix 3, and I'll link it back to Appendix C, Newham Sparks. I won't read. It's in place, and it's green, amber, and a lot of Newham Sparks is very dependent on our data and technology. But then when you scroll back up, you take a look at our IT infrastructure, ICT. It's predominantly in red, amber. One of the biggest risks of us actually engaging in a very data-led, data-friendly economy and relying on a system technology and IT risk, which is actually in amber, lacks business continuity or full business continuity controls. It's in the report. I just wonder, should Newham Sparks be amber in terms of rather than green? I know it's on budget, but I just think due to the scope, the size, the fact that it's an East Ham Town Hall, which we've spent considerable amounts of money into a data hub, and we're dependent on a very large IT infrastructure, which is costly, doesn't quite have the adequate controls as it's pointed out here, and will significantly cost a lot of money. Should that just change to amber, just so that we have a relative assurance? I know, yes, it's on budget for now, but you're hiring lots of people, it's going to increase, and I just wonder, because ICT is so risky, should that just somewhat mitigate it and just we change the colour just a bit? We heard tonight that we launched a website and it didn't have a complaints functionality. I just think it should be a slightly high risk.
It's a fair point, and I'll give it some consideration. I think it is important to sort of draw the distinction between some of the risks highlighted here, which are the IT from that internal point of view. Does our own IT work as we would like it to know, and cybersecurity risks and so on, and Newham Sparks, which is predominantly, but by no means wholly, predominantly focused on the sort of external side of things, and actually trying to stimulate the data economy, I think is this phrase you use, James. So I think there are some distinctions between it, but I think it's nonetheless a fair point, and I'll definitely reflect on that in terms of the categorisation of that risk.
Thank you, Conrad. Quick question, please, Councillor Chowdhury.
Mine's about the climate change objective.
I don't think we've got to that one yet. We're still on the corporate risk register.
Okay.
Councillor Chowdhury, please.
Sorry, we're not on the resident experience yet, are we?
No, we're on the...
Which page are we?
No, it was on the environment one, wasn't it?
No, it's number 6, strategic climate change.
What page is it on, Councillor Chowdhury?
225.
2.
I apologise.
Okay, so the question is, so we've declared a climate emergency. I find it interesting that our risk appetite is therefore moderate rather than low. Is there any explanation of how that assessment is made? Also a bit conscious that our target is carbon neutrality by 2030 on our mitigation team. Director, is that a sufficient mitigation, or should there be something more substantial there, given that we've got 7 years to complete that? Okay.
Yeah, okay. So we have made that appointment, and the key part of that is that although a lot of work has been done to date, and council has for the last 3, I think, years received an annual report on the progress being made on tackling the climate emergency and the various actions being undertaken to decarbonise Newham's business as a council. So I think it's a fair point to make that there's probably more that could have been put in the organisations across the country, world, are struggling to understand exactly how delivering on all those carbon promises and aspirations will in fact be delivered. I'm chairing next month's meeting of the Trade and Working Group that's looking at precisely how we will harmonise even just the counting of carbon, which is actually quite a contentious and complex subject and once it gets into the detail of it. So again, I think it's a fair comment that maybe we need to reflect on the categorisation of the risk and certainly to explain more what is being done for that. So those are fair comments and we'll reflect on them. But I just want to give that assurance. We've not just said, oh well, appointing a new director and when they start, they'll sort of crack on with this and we'll leave it until then. There's lots that's been done up until that point too.
Okay, thank you, Conrad. Councillor Chatter.
Chair, my question is related to Appendix C, and we're not there yet. Can I just that we move standing orders to be on the
Yes, I think we will have to.
I think we might have to. Oh yeah, is it green?
That's that question.
Sorry, Chair, are you moving standing orders for carbon power?
Yes. Yes.
Your question on the climate change strategic. Back to Claudia's question, the biggest impact we can make is just decarbonising our council housing stock, and because that's the biggest impact we can make. And therefore, is this on this entry? Could we not have a TikTok? You've got 16,000 homes. How many of them are compliant? And every quarter we can look at that figure going forward. That is, in a previous slide, our energy carbon beneficial, whatever the proper word is. The biggest impact we can make in our housing stock, but we don't appear to have said that anywhere in our corporate register. And maybe going forward, can we have like a temperature? How many homes are compliant? I think that's the biggest impact we can make. I accept that my question on this new appointment is the impact of this post. Do we need someone to come in and tell us to decarbonise our homes? We already have a housing director.
So let me take those two questions separately. I mean, you're absolutely right. But housing and heating and everything that goes with it is one of the most significant contributors towards carbon. And I think it would be right to explain on a regular basis, exactly what steps have been taken, how many energy efficient boilers or solar panels or whatever have been installed in order to contribute towards that. Again, I kind of referred to the complexity of this because building, of course, is a very carbon heavy activity. So, when you build new homes, the immediate impact is, of course, you add to the carbon footprint. We have adopted 4 new developments, something sort of akin to the passive house standard to try and ensure that those are done in the most efficient way possible. But again, to highlight the complexity and indeed conflict with important policies in this area. That's why the report on that will be. The Director of Climate Action is absolutely not an appointment to sort of come in and tell us you need to improve housing. What was lacking in the arrangement was a coordinating focus for the activity that is going on. And I think the appointment that we've made, there's some real deep sort of expertise in this area as well. will significantly enhance our activity there.
Okay, any further questions, please, on this topic? Okay.
As an action on property that recorded as an action, Chair.
You've asked if we can see a copy of the report and updates to CMT. I'm not sure what was the answer to that. I just recorded it as an action. But
Yeah, we'll provide a copy of the mention.
Okay. The Audit Committee is recommended to note the contents of this report to members present in the room. May I see by a show of hands is the recommendation agreed?
Excuse me, Chair, we've only gone through the corporate risk register. We've got environmental and sustainable transport is the Appendix B, next one, if there are any questions.
I've got loads.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You can't listen. It's 10 to 9. We still have other items on the agenda. So we have to move through swiftly. One question each, a quick answer, and we move on. Okay?
We go in each one.
No. You put forward a question, it's answered, we move on. We don't have time.
Before my question.
Okay, so Councillor Booker, please, one question.
Okay, so regarding the climate change, and I apologise, Eric, because I was confused earlier, regarding the climate change operations and financials, this feels like it was an afterthought or someone's stream of consciousness, and I apologise if that sounds too rude. I honestly don't mean it to, because it has things like, so it says at full council at the last full council, I asked a question on how we were embedding the risk of unusual or unexpected weather events into how we operate as a council across many different areas. And the Mayor did respond, saying that as part of our wider climate emergency response in the face of climate change, the council is undertaking the required planning and preparatory work to effectively manage this type of prolonged cold weather. She focused on the cold weather in that case. I'm wondering whether is what we're seeing here the representation of that. It seems like it's pre anything's actually happened. So it's saying define an extreme weather and event and develop BCP plans. So I presume that those haven't happened yet. So are we talking about things that we're wanting to happen? When it comes to contingent actions, it says a lot of the contingent actions in lots of the other things make absolute sense. Things like immobilizing of older vehicles to use as spares is one of the contingent actions for number 4, parts supply. The contingent actions for climate change operations are, we have snow, we just can't predict when or if it will come. 2, floods, do we have them? 3, extreme weather, extreme heat events. How would we define extreme heat? 40 degrees plus, ? What is the impact on the borough, ? 4, wind, high winds causing risk to life and limb and property damage, tree falls, etc. Those don't seem to be contingent actions. They seem to be someone's thoughts around how we could create a plan. So I suppose my question is that what's happening? Is this kind of the pre-thought going into a plan happening, or is this actually the plan?
Maybe Jamie and Kirk on screen.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that question. Thank you, Councillor. So that section you can see there is unfortunately a typo, and we apologise for that, because what you are seeing is our collection of thoughts from a workshop that we had to discuss the issue. So in terms of climate change, obviously it is in an emerging picture, and we're not entirely sure of what all of the medium and long-term effects will be, but certainly from an environment services perspective, we have seen things like longer summers creating us increased revenue costs because we have to do more grass cutting and pruning, for example. Very strong heat temperatures of over 35 degrees will quite often melt some of our roads, which can be a problem for us. They can also cause us problems with our structures and bridges, with heat expansion, and therefore a requirement for more safety inspections. In terms of the winter, we've seen some quite harsh winter conditions before Christmas, which costs us quite a lot more in terms of our winter service, both the monitoring and delivery of that service. So I think what we're trying to articulate is that climate change is having a direct impact on our universal services, and we need to be mindful of that, and as far as possible plan our services accordingly to be able to react to those weather events.
And do we have those plans yet? Because this doesn't suggest that we have. Are they already there?
We do. So some of the plans we've had for a long time. For example, the winter service plan is something that we've always had. However, we are having to change that now. We've got a review into our winter service plan in light of the conditions that we had before Christmas, because we realised that as well as keeping our usual carriageways operational in our primary routes, we've now got a greater requirement to look after our sustainable transport networks as well in terms of our cycle routes, areas like the Greenway and Mitchell Walk. So we're looking into things like that. But in terms of on the other side of the kind of extreme weather, in terms of the heat conditions, we are developing plans around our surface dressings for carriageways. We can use a different mix of tarmac, which will be more resistant to the heat conditions. That's a developing area for us and will be something that we will address as part of our long-term transport strategy, which is currently being worked on.
Just to say, floods, do we have them? Yes, is the answer.
We've got the Thames barrier in the borough.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chadder, please.
Very quickly, page 239, resident experience, green, amber, red. Take on board the commentary in the box, but given our discussion previously about how critical customer or resident experience was, look at the smart action plan. Can we also take account of what will happen if you don't get a budget for this? And I'd really, really urge you in terms of the Save to Invest programme. If we don't get this right, I don't know what we're doing here, to be honest.
Yeah, I completely take that on board, and I do think that red rating on the budget will move on to amber or green in the very near future. There are some important budget lines in the currently out for consultation budget, both for investment in the transformation programme itself, but also in substantially increasing the capacity of the call centre to give us a much better chance of meeting our 95% calls answered on time targets and other improvements in the core operation. So they're in the budget consultation that are currently out there being consulted. If that makes sense. So subject to that being formally ratified and agreed, I do think that will move on. And obviously, as part of bringing back the resident experience programme update to Audit Committee, we can give you a much more in-depth view into the spend plan, the action plan, and how that's all going to work.
Hey, Councillor Chowdhury, please.
As commend Councillor Quicker for highlighting this climate change operations section. Going back to that, we must have a local resilience forum, and are they plugging into these to this risk? And also, are we working with the Met Office, the Environment Agency, who almost certainly will be able to predict when we have snow and whether it will come?
I'm happy to set that question. So yes, we do work with the Local Resilience Forum, and we do a lot of work in terms of our borough emergency plans to take account of the changing climate conditions. In terms of the Met Office, yes, we also work very closely with them. They supply our winter service data, so that is the data that our highways decision making officers use to decide when we're going to go out and grit on a daily basis, and that they're doing that right now as we speak. And also we use that information and insight to guide our long-term planning for our winter service plan and what we do each season in terms of the orders we get in for the grit stock as well.
Okay.
Just a request, as you say, this is a typo, could we get the corrected version?
Yes, we can do that, no problem.
Thank you. Final question, Councillor Paul, then we'll move to closing this part.
Questions on the homelessness response programme, TA services and support. It looks like the budget has been cut by 2/3. And in another place, the budget working party, Councillor Booker will mention later, in a formal role as a link between there. It is quite concerning, the words attaching to the element, and I wondered, could provide a snapshot of what's going on. I'm sure Councillor Booker will later on provide a bit more of a clarity of what the request is, but it's quite concerning what's here.
So what page are you referring to?
241, it's place, homelessness response program, PA service support, and the homelessness prevention, indeed, Thompson.
I can comment on that quickly if helpful. Obviously, this is a transformation program that focuses on work with the housing directorate. Housing aren't here to talk about it, but there's been some substantial work done within the corporate centre teams, like Change and Insight, and across other teams, including colleagues from support departments like finance and others, to look at what's our response to the really significant challenge around temporary accommodation. These are the three kind of core work streams of a programme called the Homelessness Response Programme to tackle that. There's a range of different investment sort of asks that have come through the budget proposals that have had to go through various discussions and revisions, and you ask for what you think you need, and then you try and revise it down, and you compromise. So some of this is just a result, of kind of an endeavour to be as efficient as possible, I suppose, in resourcing the programme, which isn't a terrible thing to do. That being said, there have been subsequent conversations at CMT very recently about what could be done to meet the gap in programme resourcing required to deliver the programme. And that gap will be closing and becoming a smaller number as a result of those discussions. And it's important that those conversations have managed to take place during the budget consultation that's live. So it's a live issue. And the fact that is featured here and has resulted in immediate conversations at CMT should give you some assurance that it's not something that's being ignored and not being mitigated, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Any final comments on Appendix D? We need to bring this item to a close, please. Okay. The Audit Committee is recommended to note the contents of this report. Members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the recommendation agreed?
With the updated.
That's fine, that's not part of it, thank you. Okay. Item 11, contract waivers and extensions. I invite the officer Susan Whitewick to give a brief introduction to the report, and then I will open the floor for questions. Suzanne?
Good evening, Chair, Chair and members of the Audit Committee. So the Council's scheme of delegation requires for waivers to be reported to Audit Committee. These will be reported on a quarterly basis going forward. This report summarises waivers for Q3 financial year 22-23. So any procurement or contractual action which is not in line with the basic principle of competition is defined as a waiver and requires a waiver to be approved under the scheme of delegation. Appendices attached to this report, which shows in summary there were 4 waivers for the last quarter. One was an extension, one was a variation to a contract, and the other 2 were direct awards. Can I offer it for questions?
Any questions? Councillor Chadder, please.
Just one quick question. Who's the cabinet member who would have oversight of this? And were they consulted? Because I notice, I know it's a factual report, but who would be the cabinet member for oversight for procurement? Councillor Allen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Paul?
So given the value of these waivers, they would have been authorised by me under the delegated authority rather than directly under Councillor Ali's oversight.
So it wouldn't have needed to consult with him?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, he has overall oversight of procurement functions, definitely. That doesn't extend to individual.
What's the threshold that he would have needed to have been consulted at?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
You can come back to us.
I haven't done any of the things in here. I will check and confirm.
Thanks, Conrad. Councillor Paul?
It's just the format of the report, Chair. We've got the directorate. I wonder, could we have the team which did the waiver and the director who signed it off be useful, right? Because that would be useful. So the directorate, the team, the director, and the date requested. Please.
Suzanne, are you able to?
Yes, that can certainly be provided as a follow-up to this meeting, but definitely on the next quarter report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chowdhury?
What is the Great Estates additional design sprints?
Sorry, I didn't hear that question.
What is the Great Estates additional design sprints, the fourth waiver?
So this was for.
So the Great Estates refers generally to, I hope I got this right, to the Olympic Park and areas around there that was referred to as the Great Estate, as I understand it, at the time it was originally designed and constructed. So this will be, I don't know the precise nature of the consultancy in relation to that. And the information that's on the form underneath it, so we can provide that. The Great Estate generally sort of refers to the Olympic Park area around.
Thank you, Conrad. Councillor Booker.
Only that I wonder whether it does entirely because Little Ilford Ward is currently has Great Estates money doing some things, and we're not very close to the Olympic Park, but possibly they're two different things, maybe.
All right, let me double check and I will get out the specific form. Perhaps Suzanne, you might ask you to send that to me and I'll double check it and then provide an update to the committee, and apologies if I got that wrong.
Thanks, Conrad. Councillor Beckles.
Just on 3.2, just light touch regime. What does that mean? And I get nervous when, especially when it comes to money and so, and there's a bit of a light touch element to it, especially when it's council money. What does that involve? Yes, it's below a specific.
So light touch is a term which has a public procurement threshold. So there's under Schedule 3 in the public, Schedule 12 in the public contracts regulations. There is a Schedule 12 which outlines which is classed as light touch, subject to the light touch regime, which is part of the legislation. So that is primarily social care services. And the threshold for that is 663,540. So it's basically, if you're doing procurement, if that comes under Schedule 12, then light touch would apply. And there are some relaxed rules around that, and we follow what is outlined in the PCRs.
So perhaps, Suzanne, it'd be helpful if you could just indicate it. So the light touch regime is defined in procurement law. Perhaps you could just sort of highlight to the committee a couple of examples of things that are, for instance, not required to be done under the light touch regime that would be required under, for example, a full OJU compliant tender or similar, just to provide some further information on that answer.
Yeah, so I mean the supplies and services threshold is 213,000, so there's quite a difference. So even though there's social care services, there's quite a difference in the thresholds. So there are differences in terms of the procedures. So you go through a restricted procedure or open procedure, whereas light touch, you are able to design your procedure, but it must relate back to, in general, one of the other procedures, as you would do if you was doing a supplies or services procurement. It's basically got relaxed rules and is more flexible.
Is that sufficient, Cam?
In terms of that flexibility, just to elaborate on that, and the schedule within the legislation, does that have the, I guess, the level of assurance as a council? It probably does because it's within law, but things get overlooked sometimes. Does that have, are we assured that our due diligence processes, even on those light touch scenarios, are fully compliant and are fully robust enough that we, again, it's about social care. So back to my earlier point that we're looking at how we spend our money in these critical areas, especially when it involves vulnerable people.
Perhaps I can take that one. So I mean, the distinction we draw, and it's all a question of resourcing and balance of risk for procurements that are properly conducted under the legal light touch regime rather than larger ones. They're not led by a central procurement team. Allow services to do them, you know, with minimal oversight. Now, of course, one can add more resource to the central procurement team to provide more checking of that, and it simply becomes a question of the balance of risk. You know, that's where we draw the line at the moment. We'll need having more central resource to check what managers are doing. Yeah, clearly, you can add more and more checks and controls and balances. We think that by limiting it in that area which are defined in laws, allowed to use a light touch regime, that strikes a sensible balance between not spending too much on a procurement team and focusing that resource that we do spend on it on the kind of higher risk and higher value contracts. But I mean, of course, you're right. All sorts of contracts that we let have got risks associated with them. One simply has to draw the line somewhere. That's where we've chosen to do it.
Okay, any final questions? Okay. Thank you, Suzanne. The committee is asked to note the summary of waivers for the period the 1st of October through to the 31st of December 2020. The members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is that agreed? Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. Item 12, year ahead forward plan. I have a question for the committee, which is, following the Ofsted rating of good, do the committee wish to cease reports from Children's Services, further progress and Ofsted report with quality assurance half yearly?
No.
Okay. Members?
Are you asking us, do we want them, yea or nay?
Yes.
Oh.
No, you're asking if we wanted to stop having them. Yes. We would like to continue to have them, please.
Yeah. Clarification is quite good, yeah.
Members have not agreed to cease the half-yearly reports. Okay. My next question is on the joint area send inspection in Newham, which is currently not on the forward plan. Between December the 6th and the 10th of December 2021, Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission conducted a joint inspection of the local area of Newham to judge the effectiveness of the area in implementing special educational needs and disabilities. As a result of the findings of this inspection, it was determined that a written statement of action was required because of the significant areas of weakness in the area's practice. It was also determined that the local authority and the area's clinical commissioning group were jointly responsible for submitting the written statement to Ofsted. I understand that updates have been received in different areas of the council, including Health and Wellbeing Board, and I'm asking the committee if they would like the committee to receive updates on progress made as well, starting from the next meeting in April 2023.
I would have thought from looking at the risk register that we would at any rate think that it's worth still having those, because the appetite was green but the risk was higher. I understand that it comes to other places, and in fact it also comes to my scrutiny commission as well. We have send as a standing item, so I do understand it's being seen in other places. But I do also think that the WOSA is a statement of intent, not of delivery, and so it would seem premature to take it off. If we felt it was important enough to have had it on, it seems premature to take it off.
Councillor Paul?
On the send stuff, I would like to know what the issues we're talking about. Because they mentioned that it wasn't embedded, senior leadership wasn't doing that. And I think, okay, getting on work, I think we should want to know what actually took place. So the action are commensurate with the findings that might be your scrutiny committee, and it might not be a need to do it. And Councillor Dockett is a scrutiny chair for children, so you might like to.
Yes, please, Councillor.
I would just suggest that I don't think the audit needs to see anything in that level of detail, but I do think it would be pertinent for it to still come along, and there are other places that we're looking at it in more detail.
Okay, members have agreed to add the half-yearly reports onto the written statement of action to the forward plan. It wasn't previously brought here, it's now been added to the forward plan. That's what this question is about. Are there any other questions or comments on the report?
Is it okay to ask whether whether it's possible for us to add to anything else?
Yes.
Yes. In that case, so we've just had earlier in the week the ONS meeting that agreed the budget working party's report. And I'm aware that I'm the scrutiny chair that is sitting on here. So I've kind of been tasked with asking whether we could possibly as a committee look at some of the things that was brought up as concerns within budget working party. And one of the most significant ones, and it's really good to hear that there's going to be a look at the Grant Thornton report, because one of the specific areas was around reserve level and the processes that we've gone through in order to make the decisions that were made around that. I would like to, I have two other people here that are on the budget working party, and so I'm quite happy for them to explain in a little bit more detail why we would want to have a look at that.
Okay, Councillor Paul, if you can explain to committee,
Yeah.
I'll ask Conrad to come in. If you're saying about this is reserve levels and reserve policy, is this what it's relating to?
Yeah.
Conrad, if you could respond once you've heard Councillor Paul, please.
Well, actually, I think I'm just reading the administration's budget, which was published earlier on. And I think, for example, we talked about the reserve level, the amount of the reserves. I know we wanted 5 million, and I think the administration said 4. And I'm reading the budget as I speak. But also there were some other recommendations about the visibility of earmarked reserve, because there was some, how can I say this? It could be a bit more transparent on how the reserves are used for particular purposes. In our report, we set those out, and it'd be useful over a period of time to have a conversation on how we execute our reporting methods going forward. But the budget working party report has been published, and I think 2 of the 10 recommendations refer to reserve.
Yeah, recommendation 1 and 2 are the 2 that refer to reserves. And the reason why I mentioned the Grant Thornton report is because one of the things that it talked about within that was the ensuring staying at the 5% level in terms of reserves. So that's the reason why I mentioned that.
Okay, Conrad, if you could respond, please.
So, I mean, none of that is problematic. I do think, and probably not now at the end of a lengthy and very constructive meeting, there does need to be a discussion actually about how we coordinate the activity of scrutiny and the Budget Working Commission and audit. I'm slightly anxious about creating a situation where in effect I have the same conversation twice or 3 times rather than once. So, if that is all right, I would like to sort of arrange to have that conversation with all the relevant scrutiny chairs and others to make sure that's coordinated in the best possible way. I suppose I'm slightly sitting on the fence. I'm certainly not disagreeing with the principle of you wanting to ensure that there's some sort of oversight of that. 2 other points, if I may, quickly. I know the comment made about use of earmarked reserves. If I might ask, perhaps you would consider the word clarity rather than transparency. There's certainly no intent to, suggesting it's not transparent. It will imply that I appreciate that not intended.
Yeah, I accept that.
Certainly make the reports clearer on that. In terms of the Grant Thornton report, I mean, yes, absolutely. You've heard that we'll follow up against the findings that they've been looking at elsewhere. I just feel I want to put on the record that this idea that there is some magical fixed number of percentage of reserves and that one can simply look at that and you can sort of stop the calculation there is a bit too simplistic, more complex than that. I think that answers your points. As I'm very happy to convene some sort of meeting between audit and scrutiny or whatever it might be to just the most appropriate way to do that so we don't end up having the same conversation too often.
In fact, Chair, I wonder, would it be possible for us to do that on a few issues? And then that way we could, instead of perhaps making the decision within the next sort of 10 minutes, actually look at how we, because one of the important things I think has been mentioned in previous years is about scrutiny and audit kind of working a little bit more hand in glove rather than, having to do work for each other in some cases. And so perhaps it would be useful for us to have that conversation separately so that we could look at the things that the Budget Working Party came up with, because there were also other recommendations within their document that I think are overarching enough and about governance and how we make decisions that it would be useful for audit to be able to have a look at.
I think it's worth Conrad arranging the meeting first and then.
I think you've made the point that I was trying to make, but much better. So yes, I completely agree. A meeting like that would be hugely helpful, so that we don't set a situation where the scrutiny committee, the Budget Working Commission would make recommendations with the audit committee then track the progress. I mean, what would just see the complexity in that. So yeah, in the principle of what you're saying, absolutely, now convene a suitable meeting.
Thank you, Conrad. Councillor Paul, please, quick.
Chair, just to add to the spirit of this glitch in the switch we're talking about, and I will put it on the record. I have asked you, Chair, by the organisation, that we look at our effectiveness of scrutiny, which I'm a member of, and also looked at the effect of the audit board. I'm aware that the Grant Thornton piece of work and the bullet points, there's a piece of work which we decided today to look at, to measure the organisation against Grant Thornton, but also the other side of transparency and governance in the organisation is scrutiny. I'm led to believe that last year in March, April time, a report was done on the effectiveness of scrutiny. And I feel that report is an equal component of our effectiveness. I know, Chair, I just want to get it on the record. You have the report, you're going to read it, then send it on to the committee. But I would like that report to be part of the mix, please, because if we're looking at our effectiveness, and Quine is absolutely right, and Councillor Book is absolutely right, we've got to be seamless. I think those two reports, the independent review report on scrutiny and the Grant Thornton work, are two sides of the same coin. And I like that to be part of the debate. And I think I welcome, Chair, you sending the report to all of us so we can read it.
As I've already clarified, I've only received the report. I wish to read it first and it will be circulated to the committee. And just to add, the report has been, as you mentioned, from last year. So it's not that I'm holding on to the report. I received the report on Monday. I wish to read it over the weekend. Once I've read it, I will forward it on.
Because I'm asking you, Chair, that you've seen the report and I haven't.
I haven't seen the report. I've received it and I haven't looked at it. I will read it over the weekend.
I mean, but you thought if that report, I don't know, but is there a corporate rag rated?
I think we have to leave it there because I've just received it. I haven't read it. I haven't even looked at it. And once I've read it, I will forward it on to the committee. As I said, and if you mentioned, the report was from last March. So I just want to make clear that I have not been holding on to this report. I received the report on Monday and have not done anything with it because I've had to prepare for this meeting. I will intend to read it at the weekend. Once I've read it, it will be forwarded to the committee. Okay?
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Brooker, one final quick point, please.
Just say that I'm really pleased that we're going to have an additional meeting, just so that it's clear within this meeting that the other areas that the report would be looking at would be around temporary accommodation and also Newham Sparks. And I also wanted to just quickly mention that I know that the community assemblies stuff came from audit and that actually it is coming back to scrutiny. And so I've been asked to let you guys know that we are requesting another look at the community assembly stuff because we asked for some pre-decision scrutiny on the upcoming year and we didn't have that. So we are actually asking it to come back. So.
Pauline, could you just make a note of that, please? And if you're able to follow up when we receive that information on the community.
Yeah, so that's an additional meeting of overview and scrutiny to consider the community assembly. So you were making a statement.
Yeah, I was just making a statement to let you know, because I know that
There's no action for.
Okay.
there had been work done here, and so letting you know.
Okay, I think we're going to draw that to a close now. The committee is asked to note the contents of the forward plan of items to be considered by the audit committee for the remainder of the municipal year ahead. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the report noted? Thank you. Item 13, date of the next meeting. The date of the next meeting is scheduled for April the 12th, 2023 at Newham Town Hall. I will say a quick thank you and good night to everyone who's been watching on YouTube, and I declare the meeting